Wyoming Territory, June 1877, the wind cracked sharp over the plains as Calla Vance pressed a hand to her wide-brimmed hat, dust swirling around her boots as she stepped down from the stagecoach outside the Laramie depot. Her fingers trembled slightly, barely noticeable, but she clenched them tight. No one would see the scars if she kept her gloves on. No one would guess what she'd run from or what it had taken to survive. Behind her, the driver hoisted down a single worn trunk, its sides scuffed and scratched. She gave a quiet nod of thanks and turned toward the livery stable, her eyes scanning the town without really seeing it, until she did. A tall man leaned against a hitching post near the general store, arms crossed, hat tipped low to block the sun. His shirt was rolled at the sleeves, showing forearms dusted with trail dirt, and his posture easy but alert told her he was used to watching the world close. He looked up just as she passed, and their eyes locked. He straightened. "Ma'am," he said, voice quiet but steady. Calla gave a nod and kept walking. She did not trust men who noticed her, but August Jameson was not a man who looked at a woman like she owed him something. He watched her like he had seen something he recognized, something familiar. That look stayed with her all the way to the boarding house. She had come to Laramie to take a job stitching and mending at the mercantile. Miss Della, the elderly widow who ran the place, had sent word back east that she needed help, and Calla, desperate for a place to disappear, had answered. The room was small but clean. She unpacked slowly, folding her few dresses into the chest at the foot of the bed. She hadn't brought much, just enough to start over. That night, Laramie was quiet. The streets emptied early and moonlight stretched long over the grasslands. Calla sat by the window, sewing by lantern light when something thudded against the glass. She jumped, heart slamming in her chest. A stone lay on the sill. She rose slowly, opened the window an inch. A boy's voice floated up. "Miss Vance, Miss Della sent me." She leaned out. A freckled boy, maybe 10 years old, stood below with a satchel slung over his shoulder. "She said to bring you these, patterns and thread." Calla exhaled. "Thank you." He nodded, then hesitated. "You knew I am." He kicked the dirt. "You got kids?" The question jolted her. "No," she said softly. He looked up, eyes serious. "Good, too many kids get left behind." Then he turned and ran off into the dark. The next morning, she started at the mercantile. Miss Della moved slow with age, but her mind was sharp. She showed Calla where the mending went, where the fabrics were kept, and where the rifles stayed behind the counter. "We get drifters sometimes," she said. "You keep your head down, you'll be all right." For a few days, Calla worked in peace. She kept quiet, kept her gloves on. But trouble had a way of sniffing out the wounded. On the 5th day, a man stepped into the shop, tall, broad, smelling of whiskey and sweat. He swaggered past the bolts of cloth straight to the counter where Calla stood alone. "You the new girl?" he asked. She nodded once, wary. He grinned. "Pretty thing like you ought to be married. A woman alone out here? Dangerous." She didn't answer. He reached across the counter and brushed a finger against her sleeve. "Bet you got soft skin under them gloves." "Take your hand off the counter," came a voice from the doorway. The man turned and there stood August Jameson, arms loose at his sides, eyes steady. "Who the hell are you?" the drunk asked. August stepped forward. "The man who will throw you through that wall if you touch her again." The man laughed, but August did not. Calla watched frozen as August moved between her and the stranger. A long moment passed. Then the drunk muttered something and backed out the door. August turned to Calla. "You all right?" She nodded, but her fingers shook again. He noticed. His voice softened. "You do not have to talk." "Just wanted to be sure you are safe," she swallowed. "Thank you." He tipped his hat and left. That night, she found herself standing outside the livery stable. The wind had picked up again, but she did not flinch from it. August stepped out from the shadows, surprised to see her. "I wanted to say thank you," she said. "You already did." She hesitated. "I am not used to kindness." He looked at her then, really looked. "I figured." They stood like that a while in the quiet. He nodded toward the corral. "Come meet the horses." She followed him in. There were 6 of them, calm, well-fed. He moved among them like he belonged there, brushing one's flank, checking hooves. "You live here?" she asked. "Out east of town. I run cattle. Lost my pa last year, so it is just me now." She touched the fence rail. "I lost someone too." He looked at her, waiting. "My husband. 4 years ago, he was not." Kind. August was silent, then he said, "That why you left the city?" She nodded. He took a slow breath. "You do not have to be afraid here." "I am not afraid of this place," she said. "I am afraid of what I carry." August stepped closer. "Scars?" She met his eyes. "The kind nobody sees." He did not look away. "Those are the ones worth fighting for." Something cracked inside her then, not pain but something close to hope. The next day, she found a note tucked under her sewing basket. Just a few words, written in clean, careful script. "If you ever need someone to ride with you anywhere, anytime, I will be there." August, she folded the note and tucked it into her pocket. The days grew warmer. She started walking past the livery on her way home, sometimes stopping to talk. Sometimes just watching him work. He never pressed, never pried. One evening, he handed her a smooth wooden carving an owl small enough to fit in her palm. "For your windowsill," he said. "Keep watch." She took it carefully. "Thank you." He stepped closer, voice quiet. "You do not have to keep running, Calla." She met his eyes, and for the first time in years she believed it might be true. The July heat pressed down heavy, and the town moved slow beneath its weight. Calla kept to her work at the mercantile, her stitches even, her mind steadied by the rhythm. She had stopped flinching at the bell over the door. Her shoulders still tensed sometimes, but less than before. August had not come by the shop again, but she saw him riding past each morning, his sorrel gelding cutting a path down the main street toward the eastern trail. He never stopped unless she was outside, and even then, he'd tip his hat and keep going. It was becoming something she watched for without meaning to. On a Wednesday afternoon, Miss Della excused herself early, citing a headache. Calla locked the door behind her and turned to gather the week's ledgers. She had just reached the back room when someone knocked on the side entrance. She opened it slowly. A woman stood there, hair plaited into a thick braid, skirt dusty from travel, and a satchel slung over her shoulder. Her cheeks were sunburned and her eyes sharp with exhaustion. "I'm looking for August Jameson," the woman said. Calla blinked. "He doesn't live here." "I know. They said you might know where he's working cattle these days." Calla hesitated. "Are you kin?" The woman's mouth flattened. "Not anymore." There was something guarded in her voice, something brittle around the edges. Calla stepped aside. "You can come in." "Rest a minute." She poured a cup of water from the pitcher, set it down on the counter, and waited. The woman drank half before speaking again. "Name's Clara. Used to be married to August's older brother." Calla nodded slowly. "I didn't know he had a brother. Not many do." "Illy left 5 years back. Got himself killed in Kansas last winter. I only found out a few weeks ago." She looked up then, her voice low. "I'm not here to ask for anything. I just wanted August to know. Illy was rough, but he wasn't all bad." "Thought his brother should hear it from someone who knew." Calla folded her hands. "He'll be in town by dusk. He always is on Wednesdays." Clara gave a tired smile. "Thank you." She stepped back into the sun, and Calla watched her disappear down the street, her shoulders squared against whatever came next. That evening, Calla walked to the edge of town, where the path dipped toward the river bend. She didn't know why she went, only that her feet kept moving. She found August near the water, shirt sleeves rolled again, his hands in the river, washing dust from a length of rope. He looked up when he heard her steps. "Evening," he said. "There's a woman in town asking after you," she said. He nodded once. "Clara," she said. She was married to Illy. August set the rope aside and sat back on his heels. "Haven't seen her in years." She said. "Illy's gone." "I know." He didn't say more, and she didn't press. Instead, she sat beside him on the bank, the heat of the day still lingering on the rocks. "I didn't take you for someone who carries silence like armor," she said after a while. "I was raised to hold things close," he answered. "My pa didn't speak much, neither did Illy. When words did come, they weren't kind." She watched the river slide past, slow and brown and full of summer frog song. "You're not like them." "I try not to be." Calla turned her face toward him, the last light catching her cheekbones. "You succeed." August reached for a flat stone and skipped it across the water once, twice, then watched it sink. "Did she look worn?" he asked. Calla nodded. "She was always the toughest of us. Illy never deserved her." They sat in the fading light, neither speaking. The frogs fell quiet. A hawk passed overhead, wings stretched wide. Finally, August spoke again, voice low. "I never told anyone this, but when I was 16 I tried to leave, rode as far as Cheyenne. I had nothing but a bedroll and $2. Got sick and ended up working for a blacksmith just for food. What brought you back, my ma? She wrote and said she'd die before she let Ellie take over the land. Pa was already gone by then. I came back. Took the ranch from my brother piece by piece. Calla listened, her breath caught between memory and something like recognition. You know what it feels like, she said. To walk away from something because it's the only way to survive. He didn't look at her, but his voice held quiet certainty. I know exactly what that feels like. She stood then, brushing dust from her skirt. You should see Clara. She didn't look like she came for comfort, but she stayed long enough that I think she needs it. I'll find her. Calla took a step, paused. You ever think about leaving again? His eyes met hers across the dusk. Not anymore. She walked back slowly, the wind cooler now, carrying the scent of sage. When she reached the boardwalk, she found a small bundle set on the steps of the boarding house, a length of cotton fabric, deep green, and a folded paper pinned to it. Thought you might make something for yourself this time. No name. But she didn't need one. She held the cloth to her chest, closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, let herself imagine what it would feel like to be safe. Not just hidden, but known. The rain came sudden and hard 2 days later, flattening the dust into mud and flooding the alleys behind the mercantile. Calla stood barefoot on the porch of the boarding house, hem lifted in her hands, watching the water rush past in shallow rivulets. Most of the town was quiet, save for the hammer of the downpour on roofs and the distant creak of shutters not latched tight. A wagon wheel cracked somewhere near the feed store and she flinched before she could stop herself. No one else was on the street. A door opened behind her. Mrs. Tenner, the landlady, stepped out with a shawl tucked around her shoulders. Her hair had come unpinned from its usual tight knot, silver strands curling loose in the damp. You'll catch your death out here, the woman said, not unkindly. I like the sound, Calla replied. It covers everything else. Mrs. Tenner studied her for a moment, then nodded. My husband used to say thunder was the only thing louder than his regrets. Calla glanced over. Where is he now? Buried up in the Red Hills, under a cottonwood that never quite died. She pulled the shawl tighter. You learn to live with the sound of things you can't change. Calla looked back at the rain. Her chest felt heavy, not with fear, but with a weight she hadn't named yet. That evening, the clouds broke just before dusk. The streets were still slick, and the sky burned orange near the horizon. She stepped out with her mending basket under one arm, walking toward the livery without knowing if he'd be there. He was. August leaned against the open stall door of a dun mare, brushing her with slow, even strokes. His shirt was damp from work, and his boots were caked in mud clear to the heel. You walk through that storm? He asked without turning. I waited it out. Thought I'd bring you this, she said, holding out a folded shirt, the stitching at the collar newly reinforced, the cuffs patched with care. He took it from her hands like it mattered. You didn't have to. I wanted to, she said, and meant it. He looked at her then, eyes steady beneath the brim of his hat. I saw Clara off this morning. She's headed to Fort Bridger, said she might take work at the Garrison Hospital. Was it hard? She asked, not like I thought. We said what needed saying, then we didn't say anything else. Calla set the basket down and reached out, brushing a fleck of hay from the mare's neck. You ever think about what's next? She asked. After the fences are mended and the fields are seeded. After the shop closes for the day. Sometimes, he said, but I'm not good at guessing past what I can see. I've been trying to picture it, she said. A life where I don't wake up wondering what I have to brace for. You ever picture sharing it? She hesitated, her hands still resting on the mare's withers. Not till lately. She stepped back and he didn't follow. Instead, he reached into a saddlebag and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Inside, wrapped in oilskin, was a pocket knife with an antler handle and initials carved small near the hinge. This belonged to my ma, he said. She gave it to me the day I turned 20. Told me it was for carving out the life I wanted, not the one I was born into. Calla traced the letters lightly with one gloved finger. I kept it packed away for years, like it didn't matter, but I want you to have it now. She looked up quickly. I can't take something like this. You can, he said. You already gave me back something I thought I'd lost. What's that, Hope? He said simply. She drew in a breath, then nodded once, slowly. Then I'll carry it with me, not as something borrowed, but as something that's mine now. He reached for her hand, not hurried, not uncertain, just steady. She let him take it. You scared? He asked. Not of you, she said. The wind picked up again, but it was gentle this time, brushing past them like breath. Somewhere near the hills, a coyote called once and was answered from farther off. She stepped closer, close enough that her shoulder brushed his chest. His arm came around her without needing to ask. I don't want to keep hiding, she said. I want to build something, with walls that don't trap me. With someone who sees me whole. August pressed his forehead to hers, quiet and warm. Then let's build it, he said. Slow, solid, like fence posts sunk deep. She nodded, and he kissed her then, soft and sure, like he meant it to last. It was the first time in years she didn't feel like she had to run. By mid-August, Wyoming's high grasslands turned brittle under the weight of the sun, and Calla found herself rising earlier, drawn to the quiet before towns stirred. She kept her shawl draped across her shoulders in those early hours, not for warmth, but for the strange comfort of something settled around her. August met her most mornings now at the edge of the mercantile's porch, his hat in hand, not out of habit, but because he said it felt right to greet her that way. He never lingered unless she did, never assumed his presence was owed. She began offering him coffee in a tin cup, and he began bringing dried chokecherries in his pocket, which he claimed were better than sugar if you let them sit under your tongue. One morning, she leaned against the post while he finished tying a new bridle to his saddle. His hands moved with the same quiet precision she'd come to know, nothing wasted, nothing done twice. Do you ever miss the places you've never been? She asked, not looking at him. I think about the ocean sometimes, he said, not because I want to live near it. Just to know if the sound's anything like wind through cottonwood, she watched the dust lift around his boots. I used to dream about Montana, somewhere with fir trees instead of fences. You still could, he said. She turned to him then. I'm not asking to leave. I know, he said, and reached for her hand, resting it gently on the saddle horn. But if you ever did, I'd ride beside you. That evening, Miss Della called Calla into the back storeroom. A letter had arrived from Denver, with the mercantile's seal scrawled across the wax. Calla opened it slowly, her hands steady now, not from lack of nerves, but from having somewhere to ground them. Inside was a formal offer. The owner of the Denver location had seen samples of her stitching sent without her knowing. Della admitted and was offering a position managing the tailoring counter, with fair wages and board included. Calla read it twice, then folded it and placed it in her apron. You sent them my work, Della shrugged, leaning onto her cane. Didn't figure you'd advertise yourself, someone had to. I don't know if I'm ready for a city again. No one said you had to be, Della said. Just means you've got choices now. Calla walked to the livery near sundown. She found August stacking bales inside the barn, the air thick with hay and the scent of horses. She held the letter out, but he didn't take it. You going? He asked. I haven't decided. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You want me to say don't? No, she said. I want you to tell me what it would mean if I stayed. He stepped forward, quiet settling between them like dust on a beam. I've got land that needs tending. A house that could be fixed up if someone cared enough to make it more than just shelter. I've got no one else waiting for me when the sun sets. I'd like that to be you. That's what it would mean. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached out and placed the letter on a nearby barrel, the wax seal already cracked. I want to learn what it means to stay, she said. Not because there's nothing else, but because this feels like something that grows. He nodded once, then reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a ring, simple silver, no stone, slightly tarnished. It was my ma's, he said. She wore it when she was picking apples and when she was burying her husband. Said it reminded her that love was the one thing worth keeping on your hands. Calla took it, her fingers brushing his. I'm not ready for grand words. I'm not offering any, he said. Just a promise that whatever comes, we face it side by side. She slipped the ring on slowly, the metal warm from his pocket. It fit. Outside, the wind picked up again, but didn't carry dust this time, only the scent of rain returning from the west. She looked out across the sky, broke into a quiet smile and said, Then let's build something that won't wash away. He took her hand, and they stepped out into the dimming light together, not running, not hiding, but walking forward into a life neither of them had dared to imagine until now. The first frost came early that year, sharp and sudden, turning the grass around August's homestead brittle at the edges. Calla stood by the window of the house they had begun to make their own, watching the breath of the horses rise in soft plumes beyond the fence. Her hands were dusted with flour. She had been kneading bread when the cold light shifted, and the scent of yeast still clung to her sleeves. Behind her, August added another log to the fire with one knee braced on the hearth. He'd removed the broken latch from the side door that morning and was planning to carve a new one before dusk. They had made small improvements together since she'd moved in. New hinges on the barn gate, a shelf over the kitchen basin, a pair of curtains stitched from the green cotton he'd once given her. "You ever think about teaching?" he asked, brushing his palms against his trousers as he stood. Calla turned. "Teaching what? Sewing, reading, anything?" He leaned against the doorframe. "There's a new schoolhouse going up 2 miles west. They're looking for a woman to help with the girls, someone firm but patient." She tilted her head. "Are you calling me patient?" "I'm calling you steady." Calla smiled just a little. "I never imagined myself in front of a room full of children." "Doesn't have to be a room full," he said. "Could just be 1 or 2. The McClary girl's near grown, but she still stumbles through her letters. Her mother asked about you last week." "I don't want to take on something I can't give my whole self to," Calla said, folding her arms. "Not when I've just begun to feel like I belong to something." August stepped closer. "You don't have to decide now." "Just thought you should know the world's starting to look your way." She met his eyes. "It never did before." He reached up and brushed a bit of flour from her cheek. "It does now." That night they ate by lamplight, side by side at the table he had built with his own hands. The wind outside scraped gently across the eaves, but the warmth inside held. After the dishes were washed and dried, they sat before the fire. August pulled out a small wooden box from beneath the hearth bench. "I've been saving this," he said, setting it in her lap. She opened it slowly. Inside were 5 strips of folded paper, not letters, but pages torn from an old ledger. On each, he had sketched something with charcoal: a chicken coop, a water barrel, a garden fence, a cradle, and a small wooden bench with a back carved into the shape of a pine tree. "You drew these?" she asked, running her finger over the lines. "I figured if we were going to build a life, we ought to picture it first." Calla stared at the cradle for a long moment. "I don't know if that part's possible." August's voice was quiet. "It doesn't have to be, wasn't a promise. Just a hope." She closed the box gently. "Hope's enough." The next week, she visited the McClary homestead with a basket of mending and stayed long enough to walk Margaret through the alphabet twice, guiding her hand over each letter. She didn't promise to come back, but she did. Once a week, then twice. The schoolhouse was finished by November. She agreed to help with the younger girls through the winter. It was only 2 days a week, but when she came home, her cheeks were flushed and her voice carried a softness that hadn't been there before. One morning, she found a note tucked beneath her needle case. Not written, but drawn a sketch of a small wooden cabin with smoke curling from the chimney and 2 figures seated on a bench outside, their hands clasped between them. That evening, she told him she wanted to plant a garden come spring. "Then we'll start clearing the plot next thaw," he said. Winter settled quiet and long. They spent the coldest days in each other's company, mending, carving, reading aloud from a book of folk tales she'd found tucked on the back shelf of the mercantile. They laughed more than either of them had in years, not loudly, but in that warm way you do when you know the person beside you listens with their whole heart. In February, they rode into town on a sleigh borrowed from the neighboring ranch. They signed their names in the church ledger, exchanged vows before the preacher and 2 witnesses, and shared a meal afterward with Miss Della and Mrs. Tenner, who had brought a handkerchief stitched with Calla's initials in tiny, perfect thread. That night, as snow fell soft across the fields, Calla stood on the porch of the home that was now fully hers. August came up behind her, wrapped a wool shawl around her shoulders, and pressed a kiss to the side of her neck. "I used to think peace was something that came at the end of everything," she said. "And now?" he asked. "Now I think it's something you build one morning at a time." Spring came slow but sure. The soil softened and they planted potatoes, carrots, a row of beans. August built the bench from his sketch and placed it beneath the cottonwood near the pasture gate. Each evening they sat together, their hands sometimes busy, sometimes idle, but always linked. By midsummer, the wind carried the scent of sage and turned the fields gold. Calla stood in the doorway of the schoolhouse one afternoon, watching Margaret sound out the word elm without stumbling. She held that moment in her chest like a lantern. When she returned home, August was in the yard, shaping the frame of a chicken coop. He looked up as she approached, his smile quiet and complete. She pressed a hand to his chest. "Whatever comes next, I want to meet it here, with you." "Then that's where we'll meet it," he said, and they did. They grew older with the land, not in haste, but side by side. They built what they'd dreamed and more fences that held, rooms filled with warmth, and a love that stayed steady through every season. Their story was not loud, but it held, like good earth, like deep roots, and it never once let go.